Good morning, everyone. I'm Alicia Hurley, Vice President for Government Affairs and Community Engagement. I'm based up in New York University in the New York campus. But welcome to all of you for this wonderful dialogue that we're about to have today in NYU's newest site here in Washington, D.C. This is a space that we opened about a year ago. We had our full class here. We have students. We have spaces for about 130 students who want to study and do internships and engage in public policy, but also it gives us a really rich platform to do public policy events such as this. So I really want to thank everybody for being here today and joining us. We are live streaming this, and so I want to welcome anybody following us on the web. I'm told that you can follow us also by tweeting or on Twitter at #EnergyPolicy and #NYU. And mostly it's just a good time to sit back and hear some really great ideas. We've got a very rich panel today, and I'd like to welcome my co-host, our co-host for this event, who is Governor Tony Knowles, who's the president of the National Energy Policy Institute. Governor Knowles was a two-time governor of Alaska, two-time mayor of Anchorage, and a two-time parent of two daughters who went to NYU, which is probably what we'll remember you most for. So you ban a purple flag at any point. So let me welcome you up to the podium. Have a wonderful discussion, and welcome to the NYU facility. Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks to Dr. Hurley and NYU for their participation. And I think so appropriately having an energy event in this state-of-the-art Leeds building. As a Western country boy from Montana and Idaho, Jim Messina came to Washington and worked as the chief of staff for both Senator Dorgan and Senator Baucus. He continued as Deputy Chief of Staff for President Obama and then chair of the Obama re-election campaign for 2012. He continues today as chair of the Organizing for Action. And as I understand, it's the largest, the best organized, the best funded grassroots advocacy group in American political history. Climate change is one of their highest priorities. Please welcome Jim Messina, who is also an honorary Alaskan. Jim?
Thanks, Governor. Governor and I have caught many fish together in Alaska, and I'm sad to say he's much better than I am. And big fish in Montana aren't as big, or much bigger in Alaska. So I want to talk to you today about politics and how politics affect climate change. You know, it's interesting, the overall mood has shifted on this issue nationally in the past few years. You've seen this true in other issues as well. But in climate change, the issue for American voters is no longer if, but when and how we are going to deal with this, especially with the crucial swing populations of independents and young voters across the country. If you look at two other issues that have moved substantially in American politics in the past couple of years, gay marriage and immigration, the work was done on the substance of those issues before the politics changed. And I think that's what you're seeing both in the work the governor's doing and, of course, all the work that Heather and the president are doing to raise this issue nationally and to act and to lead on this issue. I think you will see the same shift on the politics of climate change. And you've already seen that. If you look, people who follow me, and the reporters in the room know how I feel about Gallup, but I'm going to actually use Gallup numbers for the first time in my entire life to make my point, because I think the actual numbers are even better than these, but we'll try. Concerned about global warming has moved with independent voters 8 points in the last 2 years, with Republican voters 10 points in the last 2 years. If you look at do you agree with the science of global warming? 15 points with Republicans in the past 2 years, including for the first time a majority of Republicans agreeing that the science is there on global warming, and 10 points with independent voters. Obviously, Democrats have been there for a very long time as well. In the past, this issue has been used to divide people on jobs versus the environment. That is no longer true for the majority of American voters, including independents and swing voters, who now believe you can and must do both, especially with young voters who believe by over 70% you can create jobs and protect the climate. In fact, they think it's a no-brainer. It was interesting, in the 2012 election, we did focus groups with young voters, and we asked them to describe a Democrat. And they said Barack Obama. And we asked them to describe a Republican, and their number one word was dinosaur. And we asked them why their biggest example was climate change. And their second biggest example was social justice. And those two issues are moving young voters towards Democrats. And as the Republicans look at this issue, they've got to come to the mainstream to be relevant to a whole generation of young voters who are going to be important voters for them for the next 40 years. They cannot continue to lose young voters by 25 points, which is how they lost them in the 2012 election. And so going forward, I think you will see at least smart Republicans come on this issue and begin to deal. And I think that's what you're already seeing. Obviously, you have some leaders. Senator McCain has long been a voice of reason on this, and other folks will follow as well. At Organizing for Action, which is the president's political arm out of the 2012 campaign, we, as the governor said, are spending a lot of time talking about climate change and talking about it with our supporters and with our activists. We're doing three things. Number one, we have launched a climate deniers campaign to call out folks who are denying the science of this. There's already been good articles about all the work we've done on this and really calling out folks on both sides of the aisle who still want to question the science. That is a position not held by the majority of voters, and it's been interesting to see people try to run back to the old fight about jobs because they know they can't win the science argument with the majority of American voters. We're going to continue to do that. It's a very motivating factor for our supporters in a way that is a very big deal. The second thing we are doing is launching a state-by-state campaign to partner with renewable energy companies to help move our supporters to solar, to wind, to other forms of alternative energy and renewable energies to motivate our base. We have good partnerships with corporate America on this and are signing up folks every single day for solar and wind and other things that are really exciting as we begin the transformation to the next economy that will create jobs as the president has laid out. And the third thing we are very focused on is defending the president's plan he rolled out this week. We've already had 220,000 of our supporters sign up to be in that campaign in the first 48 hours. Over 600,000 people since we launched OFA in January have signed up to be part of our climate change action campaign. And it is an absolutely motivating campaign for our folks. We have 168 house parties coming up in the next 2 weeks on this, and you'll continue to see us organize on this for the very simple reason that, we won in part because of this issue. When we looked at things to organize in the 2012 elections with especially young voters, the number one issue was climate change. And on campuses across this country, we talked about this issue repeatedly, and it was a defining issue of that election for 18 to 29-year-old voters. And as the president moves forward laying out the comprehensive plan that Heather will talk about, the folks that are involved in OFA are absolutely engaged to push this plan forward, to help it become a real vision and to defend it in Congress against the attacks. You saw the moment the president laid it out, one senator immediately announced he's going to bring it to the floor of the Senate. That is an incredibly motivating thing for our folks, and we are absolutely engaged in defending the president's plan every single day in every way we need to. So to conclude, I think you're seeing a complete shift in the politics on this issue. I think you'll continue to see it. I think every year you'll see the numbers get more and more. And I think that politicians who do not heed this warning call will both be on the wrong side of history and the wrong side of their voters in the next few years. And that's probably a good political stage to set a real policy discussion in front of us about what exactly we're going to do in the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. As a former legislative director for then Senator John Kerry, Heather Zikel worked as the top advisor on energy and environmental issues for both Kerry and Obama presidential campaigns. Today, she is the go-to person for the White House energy and environment issues. Her efforts and leadership are strong and certainly in the national spotlight. She is the person of the hour. Please welcome Heather Zikel.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm a little disappointed that I didn't get the honorary Alaskan title that Jim did, because I've actually been to the North Slope, and I'm pretty sure he hasn't. So just thought that was worth stating. This morning, as I was reflecting on both the president's comment in his speech as well as the core components of the carbon pollution plan that we rolled out this week, I was struck when I picked up the executive summary for Building America's Energy Future, the portfolio of promising policies, and thinking through the top-line targets and results. Just to read directly from the report, the coordinated plan supports two goals: to reduce oil consumption, which is the best way of reducing oil imports, and to reduce emissions of carbon dioxide and other air pollutants. That's exactly what it's at the heart of everything the president was talking about, and is certainly at the heart of the carbon pollution plan that we rolled out this week. Let me provide a little bit of context for the president's remarks this week. In 2009, President Obama made a pledge to reduce U.S. greenhouse gas emissions in the range of 17% below 2005 levels by 2020. The president remains firmly committed to that goal and to building on the progress of his first term to help move us and the world toward a sustainable long-term trajectory. Thanks in part to the administration's success in doubling America's use of renewables like wind and solar, and in establishing the toughest fuel economy standards in U.S. history, we're creating new jobs, building new industries, and reducing dangerous carbon pollution that contributes to climate change. In fact, last year, U.S. carbon pollution from the energy sector fell to the lowest level in nearly 2 decades. At the same time, while there's more work to do, we are more energy secure than any time in recent history. While this progress is certainly encouraging, climate change is no longer a distant threat. We're already feeling its impacts across the country and the world. Last year was the warmest year ever in the United States, and about 1/3 of all Americans experienced 10 days of more than 100-degree heat. The 12 hottest years on record have all come in the last 15 years. Asthma rates have doubled in the last 30 years, and our kids will suffer more asthma attacks as air pollution gets worse. And more severe floods, heat waves, and droughts are driving up food prices. In spite of these trends, Congress has not acted, and the president believes we have a moral obligation to leave our children a planet that's not polluted. And by taking an all-of-the-above approach to develop homegrown energy and steady, responsible steps to cut carbon pollution, we can protect our kids' health and begin to slow the effects of climate change. In fact, the benefits of cutting carbon pollution will help keep our air and water clean and protect our environment for future generations. These steps will also spark the sort of innovation that drives economic growth and creates good-paying jobs that can't be shipped overseas. It will help modernize our power plants by equipping them with latest technology to reduce carbon emissions so America remains competitive with other countries, and move our economy towards cleaner, more efficient forms of energy that will cut our reliance on foreign oil. In short, climate change represents one of the greatest challenges of our time, but it's a challenge uniquely suited to America's strengths. Through innovation, we can and will meet this challenge in a way that advances our economy, our environment, and public health all at the same time. So to talk a little bit more about the president's plan, he laid out 3 core areas. The first is cutting carbon pollution here in America. As I said earlier, in 2012, U.S. carbon pollution from the energy sector fell to the lowest level in 2 decades, even as the economy continued to grow. I think at the heart of the president's policy is the work that the EPA is about to embark on. In his speech, he directed the EPA to work closely with states, industry, and other stakeholders to establish carbon pollution standards for both new and existing power plants. Obviously, from our perspective, that's where we can drive the bulk of the emissions reductions, and as I said, it's really at the heart of the president's plan. Other viable carbon-reducing energy policies that certainly I think there's a lot of overlap with the report and recommendations from the Institute include a handful of things. The president directed the Department of Interior to permit enough renewable projects like wind and solar on public lands by 2020 to power more than 6 million homes. He set a goal to reduce carbon pollution by at least 3 billion metric tons cumulatively by 2030. That's more than half of the annual carbon pollution from the U.S. energy sector through efficiency standards set over the course of the administration for appliances and federal buildings. The last major piece worth just discussing here is the commitment to partner with industry and stakeholders to develop fuel economy standards for heavy-duty vehicles to save families money at the pump and further reduce reliance on foreign oil and fuel consumption post-2018. So these core themes of clean energy, renewables, energy efficiency, not only in the president's plan, but obviously in the Institute's recommendations today. The second core area is preparing the United States for the impacts of climate change. Even as we're taking all the steps that we need to take to reduce carbon pollution, we also have to do the hard work to prepare for the impacts of a changing climate. I think there are 2 key things worth flagging here. The president is planning to establish a short-term task force of state, local, and tribal officials to advise on key actions the federal government can take to help strengthen communities on the ground. I think one of the things that we've learned is that oftentimes we find ourselves as policymakers, whether at the federal level or state level, trying to tackle a challenge that we're not exactly sure what makes the most sense. I mean, how do you actually plan for a changing climate, and what are all the tools that communities need in order to do that? One thing that we've heard in particular from state and local leaders is the access to information remains a challenge. The federal government, whether it's data at the USGS or at NOAA, is incredibly informative and provides important tools needed at the state and local level. So we are committed to developing not only a centralized toolkit to easily access that information, but a new climate data initiative to compile the data across the federal government and get it in the right hands. The last piece is the work that we're committed to do within the administration to lead international efforts to address global climate change. Just as no country is immune from the impacts of climate change, no one country can meet this challenge alone. There are, I think, a couple things worth highlighting on that front. As the president has from the very beginning, we have forged new international initiatives to drive the conversation about combined efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I think that was just recently became very apparent with the president's work with China on hydrofluorocarbons. I think you can expect to see additional commitments in this area, as well as a commitment to use different bilateral conversations to drive a discussion about reducing emissions. And the last piece of this is, just when it comes to public financing, our goal here is to drive it towards cleaner energy. And the president, in his broad plan, called for the end of U.S. government support for public financing of new coal-fired power plants overseas, with the exception of the most efficient coal technology available in the world's poorest countries. So the goal here is to not only show that we're leading by example in the United States, but drive other countries to adopt forward-leaning policies as well. So I think taking all of these steps together, we have a policy plan that is going to set the stage for the president's activities in the second term. And as I said at the beginning, certainly this challenge represents one of the greatest challenges of our time, but something that we know how to tackle. And just to sort of take the conversation back to the beginning, while no single step can reverse the effects of climate change or end our dependence on oil, we have a moral obligation to act on behalf of future generations. Climate change represents one of the major challenges of the 21st century, as I said, but as a nation of innovators, we can and will meet this challenge in a way that advances our economy, our environment, and public health all at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you for that important message from a real Alaskan who has walked in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge and knows what a tussock is. This week, as we've heard, President Obama took bold executive action on climate change and then placed it high on America's agenda for all of us to address. He challenged us by saying, we have a moral responsibility to our children to keep our planet healthy. Nepi is responding to this challenge with its newly released report. Our analytic and detailed approach to energy policy is really much the same as an axiom I paraphrase used by Mayor Bloomberg. In God we trust, but everybody else, show me the numbers. The invite to today's event posed the following question. Are there low-cost, politically viable policies that adequately reduce imported oil and carbon dioxide emissions? The answer is yes. According to Nepi's recently released report, Building America's Energy Future. America's economic prosperity is inextricably linked to its use of energy. While past energy practices have fueled this country's unparalleled economic growth, it's time to acknowledge the challenges we face in the absence of national energy policy. Our dependence on foreign oil is shown here, when just a few years ago it reached 60% of consumption. This slide shows the continued growth of emissions of carbon dioxide, now globally escalating to 30 billion tons a year, with correlated temperature anomalies. Excessive dependence on imported oil, massive growth of CO2 emissions, and other airborne pollutants threaten our national and economic security, our health, and our environment. To overcome these dangers, we need domestically produced energy that is affordable, more efficient, less carbon-based, and more sustainable. Such goals demand a change. Now, why do we need a policy to achieve these goals? In our economic system, the marketplace provides the most efficient allocation of goods and services. But some costs of the energy we use are not reflected in the market price of that energy, including the costs imposed by our vulnerable foreign oil supply on our economy and security, the illness and premature deaths caused by air pollution, and the unabated direction of climate change. It is the responsibility of our elected leaders to craft the changes that address these social costs, primarily through comprehensive market-driven policies while preserving the vital link between energy and our economic prosperity. To help our leaders confront America's energy future, Nepi has engaged some of the country's leading energy economists and experts to construct a comprehensive methodology for a national energy policy. Our study begins with quantifiable targets and timetables. We believe numbers count. Our goal is to reduce oil use in imported oil by 3 million barrels per day by 2035, a 15% reduction. Carbon dioxide emissions should be reduced by a cumulative total of 21.7 billion tons by 2035. This is a 15% reduction, and this will put America on track with the International Panel on Climate Change goal of limiting temperature increases and lowering the probability of catastrophic climate change impacts. Next, we built upon a previous study Nepi conducted with Resources for the Future. In that report, we used EIA's National Energy Modeling System and common cost metrics to analyze 35 policies and combinations. Our new report looks at the 5 most promising policies using the same tools and the most current energy data to analyze these policies to determine their ability to reach our targets at the least cost. The 5 policies consist of a clean energy standard, an oil security dividend, automotive fuel economy, LNG for transportation, and energy efficiencies. Each policy is tested for cost effectiveness and ability to address the scale of accomplishing the 2 targets. We calculated the societal welfare cost, effect on the national economy and federal budget, and out-of-pocket consumer costs. The results are both surprising and encouraging. We learned we can achieve solutions that are viable, low cost, and realistic without calling upon undiscovered technologies. The Nepi Clean Energy Standard. This technology-neutral policy establishes a 2035 goal of 80% clean energy electrical generation. Starting with a 45% base of clean energy, there are graduated increases in requirements that allow us to reach 80%. A clean energy credit is based upon the carbon emission of the fuel and technology per megawatt hour produced. Conventional coal receives 0 credit. Combined cycle gas turbine with 50% less CO2 emissions than coal earns a 50% credit. Renewable energy and nuclear with 0 emissions have a full credit. And a market system of tradable credits gives an alternative for new electrical generation that enables utilities to make a least cost decision to transition to cleaner fuels. The results are significant. CO2 emissions will be reduced by almost 2/3 of our target. There are additional reductions of sulfur, mercury, and nitrogen pollutants that are far greater than what is required by EPA. The fuel mix that generates this new cleaner air profile is shown here. Renewables by 2035 are doubled from 10 to 20%, and coal is cut from 45% to 16%. Natural gas goes from 24 to 34%, and nuclear increases from 20 to 29%. This slide shows that the market-driven clean energy standard reduces annual power sector CO2 emissions by 45% from the business-as-usual reference case. It has a 50% more carbon dioxide reduction than a mandated renewable portfolio standard. The Oil Security Dividend. This is our euphemism for a modest graduated oil products tax that is the equivalent of 8 cents a gallon of gasoline annually, which would reach $1.84 in 2035. Oil tax, dead on arrival? Wait a minute. The tax revenues are fully rebated through the income tax system. As the revenue from this tax offsets income taxes, we've also taken care to adjust tax rates at various income levels so as to not unfairly burden low-income taxpayers. Across all income levels, there is no cost to the consumer as all revenue raised is fully rebated. The cost to the overall economy is less than 0. By raising revenues more efficiently, the policy boosts the economy by an estimated $117 billion over the period of the study. The Oil Security Dividend will reduce the use of oil by approximately 500,000 barrels per day. It reduces CO2 emissions by 1.7 billion tons. The automobile fuel economy, or CAFE standards, adopted in 2012, are extended in our policy to 2035. This causes a reduction of oil consumption by 1 million barrels per day and a 1.8 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions. LNG for heavy trucks. This policy and the increasing difference in fuel price between diesel and LNG provides a temporary fuel tax reduction to encourage the shift in heavy trucks from diesel to liquefied natural gas. This policy and fuel cost differentials reduce oil consumption more than 400,000 barrels per day. Energy efficiency. This policy, which is current, extends existing incentives and requirements for energy-saving appliances, HVAC systems, building codes, and home-based renewable energy to 2035. This creates a reduction in carbon dioxide emissions of 2 billion tons. Nepi has presented a coordinated portfolio of 5 energy policies that reduce carbon dioxide emissions by a cumulative 18.4 billion tons, or 85% of the recommended target. Oil consumption is decreased by 3.8 million barrels a day. Oil imports actually decrease even more, to 4.8 million barrels a day, due to increased domestic production, which takes imports to their lowest level in 50 years. Nepi looked at the cost of individual policies through a variety of lenses. Consumer out-of-pocket costs show in 2035 annual electricity cost is reduced $94 per household, and natural gas is reduced $44. Expenditures on gasoline are reduced cumulative by $513 billion. Federal budget outlays for policy implementation are insignificant. Budget cost from reduced revenues for tax incentives are a cumulative $120 billion, primarily for tax credits for renewable energy. The economic impact due to policies on the gross domestic product was too small to be accurately modeled. And welfare costs consists of economists' estimation of total society cost of policies. While there is a wide variation in these estimations, we assumed the very highest cost, estimating a cumulative welfare cost of $313 billion. Most would agree that the total of these costs are affordable, but the cost of inaction is not. This NOAA slide shows the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere from the 1950s to the present. Each ton emitted by a power plant or vehicle is essentially a permanent contribution to a fundamentally altered planet. Sudden and potentially catastrophic events, such as hurricanes, droughts, and floods, can be expected to accumulate as carbon dioxide accumulates in the air. The policy costs that we cite in this study, I think, can be considered a small insurance premium to reduce these unknown hazards. The business as usual reference case shows that the United States' temporary recession-driven reduction in annual carbon dioxide emissions will soon resume its multi-generational increase. Only with a combination of policies is this trend sufficiently reversed to put the U.S. on the right track. America's need to break our addiction to oil is a goal of a different kind and is critically important for the economic well-being and national security of the nation. The modest price we pay for this policy, which reduces oil consumption by 21%, can fairly be called a down payment for peace and stability. And these policies are changes that can really happen. We do not have to believe in political miracles to envision an adoption of these policies in part or in whole, nor do we have to pin our hopes on technological silver bullets not yet discovered. Two of our policies, cafe standards and energy efficiencies, are already on the books, and we merely extend them to 2035. A third policy, LNG for heavy trucks, is a transition already occurring because of fuel market conditions. It requires no more than a temporary LNG tax break, followed by tax parity among fuels. The Oil Security Dividend costs nothing in the aggregate. Indeed, by recycling oil tax revenues, it makes the nation's system of taxation more efficient, saving money overall. The final policy, the Nepi Clean Energy Standard, would produce America's biggest contribution to addressing climate change and significantly decrease other health hazardous emissions. The fundamental structural change in our generation of electricity from a coal-dominated fuel mix to substantially more low-carbon and renewable fuels is shown in this slide. We have shown, as this slide illustrates, for reasonable cost, America has within its grasp solutions to energy problems that threaten the national security, our economy, and the environment that sustains us. Thank you.